everyone, welcome to the August 13th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look back at Pacific Classic Day at Del Mar. They ran the Pacific Classic, the Del Mar Oaks, some other major graded stakes races last weekend at Del Mar. We'll review Alabama Day at Saratoga. They ran the Alabama and some other stakes races on that card. There was some weather to deal with, some controversy. We'll go through all of that. And then we'll wrap up the show by talking about stakes at Monmouth, a couple from Woodbine, and then doing a little preview of the Travers, which is being drawn later today and obviously being run next Saturday. So go ahead and recommend my co-host, Craig Milkowski. Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing well rested from a nice vacation down in Florida and back to sweltering Oklahoma.
Yeah, the weather's been pretty crazy up here, as I'm sure you saw on TV screens. Just unexpected rainstorms. I hope that the forecast for Travers Day holds, because the forecast for Alabama weekend looked pretty nice at this time last week, and then it all changed and kind of turned around towards the end of the week. But we'll talk about Saratoga in a little bit. Let's start with the Del Mar card on Saturday, beginning with the major race that was run, the Pacific Classic. Some East Coast horses shipped west. They didn't really run at all. It was just dominated by the West Coast runners. Higher Power won off basically in a runaway performance for John Sadler. A really nice acquisition by Ronis Racing, one of many that they've had over the past couple of seasons. And just seems like this horse is really figuring things out for the new barn.
He is. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a very strong edition of the Pacific Classic. The winner, Higher Power, he looked good, but he did only get a 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which is way below average for grade one races. I will say this is a race that we didn't treat the same as the other routes. We used a separate variant for it. My partner does Southern California out in Los Angeles, and I don't disagree with him at all. Had we used the same variant, this race would have been 17 points faster, and I just couldn't go with – well, he just couldn't go with that. I assumed that's what he was going to do when I looked at the worksheet. We didn't discuss it at all, and turned out there really wasn't any need to. So I'm quite happy with the 120. It just wasn't the strongest race. It's a nice placing by John Sadler to put his horse in a spot he could win and get a grade one, but I'm just not very excited about this one.
Yeah, from a visual standpoint, it didn't seem like a very strong race, because the race was really marked by the non-efforts of a lot of the major contenders. For whatever reason, the East Coast horses just didn't seem to, I guess, handle the ship or handle the Del Mar surface. I don't really know what the story was. I know that there are reports that the surface out there can be a little quirky, and really the race was dominated by horses that were training at Del Mar for whatever reason. But no, Higher Power, he's a nice horse. He's always been bred to be a nice horse. He's a half-brother to Alternation, who was $1 million earner in dirt routes. I think he's actually the sire of Serengeti Empress. So Higher Power's always cut out to be a nice horse. He's just showing that potential now for John Sadler. But I agree. There wasn't a whole lot behind him. Draft pick on Mongolian Groom. They're okay. I guess they flattered that race, the Catalina Cruiser run earlier in the meet. But I didn't see a whole lot out of the rest.
No, same way. I mean, these are not young horses that you expect huge jump ups from. I think they just ran their race. And as you said, some others didn't. Even Pavel, who, he ran East last time, but he's a West Coast horse and is usually pretty consistent, if cut below, just didn't show up at all. So I agree with you. The story was just the horses that didn't run as much as those that did.
We'll move on to the grade one Del Mar Oaks, the other grade one that was run on Saturday at Del Mar. And the kind of the opposite story of what took place in the Pacific Classic, as the East Coast horse just dominated the West Coast fillies, which wasn't really a surprise. Campier Park was bet down to 6-5. That was probably even a little bit of value on her, given her running lines. And she got a good trip, was inside early. The pace was fast ahead of her. And once John Velasquez steered her into the clear, she just dominated this group.
Yeah, she did. She was much the best in here. She got a 113 TimeformUS speed figure for the race. I thought Hidden Message ran a good second, first time shipping in North America. Good effort. As you said, the race definitely did fall apart. So I'm not saying Campier Park wasn't best. I think she clearly was. But if there's one you want to keep an eye on, maybe Keeper of the Stars, who was the only horse anywhere near the pace that held on at all to be a decent fourth, beating only a few lengths. So this figure was about what we've been getting from the top 3-year-old fillies this time of year. Solid enough. Certainly not one. I'm not sure what they're going to do with these 3-year-olds because they're not ready to tackle older. I'm sure of that.
No, they're not. And Cambier Park, she's one of the faster 3-year-old fillies out there, and she's heading in the right direction. She seems like a big, imposing daughter of Medaglia d'Oro, so maybe she can improve further. But I agree. We haven't seen any of these horses really distinguish themselves, and we'll see what they do next with Cambier Park. I would imagine that they'll take advantage of those restricted 3-year-old spots for now. I don't know if a turnaround into the Jockey Club Oaks is a little too soon for her. I know her owner isn't too keen on running his horses, so we'll see what happens there, especially with Concrete Rose now on the sidelines. That's kind of unfortunate for that final leg of that turf triple, whatever it's called, turf tiara. Yeah, I agree with that. Cambier Park is going to need to improve to face the top older horses later in the year. We'll stay on the turf and talk about a couple of other graded stakes races from Del Mar. Moving on to Sunday, they ran the Del Mar Mile, grade 2. Looked like a really competitive race on paper, but kind of a new face in the division, Prince Earl, who had shown some potential last year as a 3-year-old, had been off for a long time. He really got back to his best form and I guess really improved around the race of his life to beat this field. And boy, he looked good in the final 8th of a mile with that effective turn of foot.
Yeah, he did. We don't have the official figure in the chart yet, but it's going to be a 123. It's a really strong effort off a nice layoff for Phil D'Amato, who seems to be just a real force in all of these turf races out in California, Southern California. And we've talked about this group all along. It's a solid group. It's pretty deep, but none of them are really top horses. And I think that kind of opens it up for a horse like Prince Earl, who was coming back as a 4-year-old. Hadn't run at all this year and had shown plenty of promise as a 3-year-old. And I think it just showed that this group is what it is. They're probably a grade 2 type that runs in all these top races out in Southern California. And he was able to beat them off the bench, closed strong into that decent pace, but not crazy pace. And, I look forward to seeing if this one can advance any off the effort because he did look good visually.
Yeah, he really did. And there's, as you were saying, it's just kind of it's a good group. They run decent speed figures, but they're not the kind of horses that we think are going to be players in the Breeders' Cup Mile come the fall. But maybe Prince Earl is going to distinguish himself now because this was a really nice effort. Giovanni Franco sort of had him in a difficult spot coming to the top of the stretch. It looked for a long time like he was just not going to get through and might be held up in traffic. But once that hole opened up, I mean, this horse took him there. He just really ran through and made the rest look like they were standing still at the end. They came on fast in this race. It's not like it fell apart at all. He was just running a lot faster than the others at the end of the race. And we'll see. He's a horse that's a 4-year-old now with just 5 lifetime starts. So obviously there are some soundness issues there. But if Phil D'Amato can keep him on the track, I think he's one that could propel himself into some bigger races later in the year.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And especially with the, who knows, with the Breeders' Cup being out west, he wouldn't have to go very far and we'll just see how he develops. Hopefully, I would assume he would at least have another race between now and then.
I wouldn't be quite so optimistic about the marathon horses that we saw in the Grade 2 Del Mar Handicap, the other turf route that we saw at Del Mar last weekend. This one was run on Saturday before the Pacific Classic. Acclimate just, I don't want to say he stole the race on the front end because it actually was a pretty legitimate pace that he set. The others just couldn't really get to him at any point. Acclimate's a horse that can be dangerous when they leave him alone up front. He's the kind of horse that doesn't mind running faster fractions as long as he's doing it well within himself, and he certainly was in this race. And at the end of the day, it was just a repeat of the result of the San Juan Capistrano, which we thought was a pretty weak race at the time, but the 2 horses coming out of that race beat the more fancied runners in this field.
Yeah, they did. And this is similar. We've talked about this group. I think Mackey's Water had stepped up out of an allowance race and won one of the last distance races. And, it's just not a strong group. The winner got a 120, which is, about what he runs at his best. He showed here, as we've seen in the past, he does his best running when he's clear. It doesn't necessarily mean he has to go slow because he didn't. He set a solid pace here, but he was all by himself for a good portion of the early race. So when he did finally get challenged, he had plenty left. And we've seen enough of Oscar Dominguez and Ritzy AP to know these aren't world beaters, but it's what we got out in California. And once again, Phil D'Amato sent out a horse who somehow won at a price in a graded stakes in Southern California.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to look at how they finished in this race because the four longest shots on the board filled out the superfecta, and the horses that were supposed to do well, like Marquise Waters and the Great Day, who was actually the favorite in this race. It's in the Post, who just can't seem to get back to his top form from a couple of seasons ago. They just didn't show up, so it made the race a lot easier for Acclimate. And nice to see this horse get a couple of graded stakes wins, but I doubt he's going to continue, especially if some other better horses ship west for these races in the future. This is just not the strongest group, and I agree with everything you said about that.
Yeah, he's an interesting horse, and if he does show up in the Breeders' Cup turfs, at least we know we'll have a pace setter.
No, that's a good point. He probably will be in those races because he deserves a shot. I mean, he's winning the races. It's just not beating horses that we think are really talented. But yeah, he's a major factor in any race that he participates in because he likes to set that fast pace. He's not the kind of front runner that's going to just slow things down on the front end. We saw the turf sprinters in action earlier in the day on Saturday at Del Mar. A bit of an upset, as obviously the two horses that were expected to do well here were Stormy Liberal, last year's turf champion, even though that sounds a little odd to say, that was returning from Dubai, making his first start since March, and Eddie Haskell, who in Stormy Liberal's absence has really been dominating that division out in California. But it was the new face, Mr. Vargas, who just really dominated on the front end, and he kind of won the race in the first quarter mile.
He did, and this was actually a race our pace projector kind of showed that he definitely had a bit of a pace advantage over the rest of the field. You don't often see that in these 5 furlong races where there's usually a lot of speed, but he was shown with a clear lead, and he really took advantage. As I said, that's where the race was won. I think we have 3 really good turf sprinters here in the top 3. I expect a little better from Stormy Liberal as he gets back more into racing. I doubt he was fully cranked at 100% for this one. But Eddie Haskell shown over and over again he's a good horse. He always runs right around that 120 speed figure. But this was a good effort from Mr. Vargas. So a 125 is nothing to sneeze at on going 5 furlongs on the turf. And he certainly thrust himself right into the top of the turf sprinting division with this one.
Yeah, coming out of the gate, it's almost like the other riders weren't riding a 5 furlong race. And Joe Talmo, who was on Mr. Vargas, was, because he opened up a lead through a pretty moderate first quarter. I know that it's not color-coded in blue, but it was slower than the final time figure. So, I mean, they did really speed up in the middle of the race. They actually went the second quarter faster than the first one, shading 22 seconds for that second quarter. And you just can't do that in 5 furlong turf races and let a good horse like Mr. Vargas get loose like that. And he made them pay at the end. I agree. They're all good horses. And with the turf sprint, I keep forgetting this, but I believe it's 5 furlongs now.
It is.
On that. Yeah. A horse like him becomes ultra dangerous in that race because he's got that tactical speed that he can set the pace or be right there. And I think all of these horses would be considered players in that division moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt. Now who knows? It's still got to deal with World of Trouble, I would assume. But, in 5 furlong races, anything can happen, the slightest bit of trouble, and you find yourself out of the race. So it should be interesting. It's one of the races I'll really be looking forward to on Breeders' Cup Day.
Yeah, one thing that we've learned over time in these 14-horse fields going 5 furlongs is it usually doesn't hurt to have speed and be able to get out in front of horses and avoid all that traffic trouble that's is going to develop in behind those horses. So a horse like this, I think you have to consider a little bit dangerous. The final stakes race that we saw on Saturday at Del Mar was the Torrey Pines for the 3-year-old fillies. Fighting Mad, she went off as the slight favorite here, but she was just ultra dominant on the racetrack. She took the lead out of the gate, just widened in the stretch. This was her first start stretching out for Bob Baffert. And as a daughter of New Year's Day, I guess she had enough pedigree to handle it, and she showed that she certainly relishes at least going as far as a mile.
She did. The 2-1 on her was a bit baffling to me. I mean, she looked like she just towered over this field, at least on our speed figures. Obviously, she was trying 2 turns for the first time, but it didn't look to be a big deal looking at the breeding, as you mentioned. She got a 113, which is exactly what she ran last time, and it was just a huge gap back to the rest. And basically, they all ran the same speed figures they've been running, right around the 100 mark. So, 113 is pretty good. It's not as good as we're going to talk about when we get to the Alabama and races like that, but it was certainly a solid effort. She showed speed, and I look forward to seeing her take on some better competition next time out.
Yeah, kind of similar to the Pacific Classic. There was an East Coast horse in here that took a lot of play, Classic Fit, and she just didn't seem to handle the surface at all. She fated to finish last in this race and was never a factor. So the race did get a lot easier once she didn't really participate. And Fighting Mad, as you said, she just had no trouble with the distance and ran back to that prior speed figure that suggested she might just be better than these. And we'll see where she goes from here. I don't know how far she really wants to go because she did get a pretty decent setup in this race, just controlling on the front end. But she's certainly heading in the right direction for Bob Baffert.
Yeah, Classic Fit's kind of an interesting horse to talk about because she came out of that really slow Mother Goose. I had some people asking me about Dunbar Road who we're going to talk about. And I know we talked about that race on the podcast before where, you know, I had said you could throw the figure out the window for Dunbar Road. But I think it proved correct for a horse like Classic Fit. Yeah, that's why you couldn't rate the race super fast. You had to change it because of the pace. And she just didn't run at all. And I think it was it kind of shows that figure was legit. It just Dunbar Road, it didn't really apply because she was in there for exercise and did what she had to do to win. But Classic Fit's just not that good, in my opinion.
I think it's a really good point because you can't just overrate all of the horses in the race. And that's especially true in the case of Classic Fit because the reason that speed figure was so low was because of the extremely slow pace. And Classic Fit was the one setting that pace. So she was perhaps the one horse in that Mother Goose that did have an opportunity to run a faster speed figure. She just was vastly inferior to Dunbar Road, who really only could run for the final quarter mile due to the trip that she got, where she was just stuck in behind the speeds that were slowing the pace down on the front end. So there was probably a bigger gap between Dunbar Road and Classic Fit than the speed figures indicate. And I think we saw that play out on the racetrack this past weekend. We'll move on to one more race, or actually two more races from Saturday at Del Mar, non-stakes races. The first race of the day was an allowance race going a mile, the same distance as the Torrey Pines run later in the day. And Forey actually ran quite a bit faster than Fighting Mad did in the Torrey Pines, winning this first race on the card. I mean, he looked pretty awesome. He raided off the pace in the early going, just looped around the field, coming around the far turn, drew off with these massive strides in the stretch. This is a pretty fascinating horse that just seems to be finding his stride as an older horse.
Yeah, he does. That's why I wanted to talk about this. When he's trained by John Sadler, who's probably right up there with Bob Baffert as the best dirt trainer out in Southern California. He certainly had his share of good runners. He has Catalina Cruiser. He had I can't even believe the Breeders' Cup Classic winner last year.
Accelerate.
Yeah, how quickly we forget, huh? But yeah, this horse has just romped 4 times in a row on dirt, 3 in a row for Sadler, where he's won super easy. This is the first time he ran a particularly fast race. He got a 122 here after running just figures around 105 the last 2 times. But he just looks so good doing it. I'm assuming they're probably going to jump this horse into stakes competition. And it would be interesting to see a horse like this show up in the Awesome again and see how he does. He'd be coming in with a higher speed figure than the winner of the Pacific Classic.
The work that John Sadler does with these trainer switches is just remarkable. I mean, we didn't even mention a horse like Giftbox, who we got from Chad Brown and just totally turned around earlier this year, got him a grade 1 victory. Just pretty amazing, the stuff that he's able to do off trainer switches. And this is another one. This horse, Forey, has had a pretty remarkable career. He actually began his career in Dubai a number of years ago. And it's actually kind of funny to go back and look at the maiden race that he participated in at Meydan back in December of 2016. He was beaten by Capizano, who turned out to be one of the favorites in the Dubai World Cup this year. And he was second, just 1 spot ahead of B Jersey, who ended up going up on to win the Met Mile. So just really funny to see that this horse began his career in an unusually live maiden race at Meydan a couple of years ago. It's been an odd journey since then. He went to Northern California, ran in some turf and synthetic races, but he's definitely a good dirt horse. No surprise, because his dam Keeper Hill was actually a Kentucky Oaks winner a number of years ago. So just a funny backstory for this horse. I'd love to know more about how he got to this point. But he seems to really be hitting his stride now. And based on the speed figure he ran in this race, I mean, there's no reason that he shouldn't be in races like, I don't know, the Awesome again in the fall. I mean, why not take a shot in a race like that? Because he's running faster than the Pacific Classic horses.
Yeah, I'd assume that's where he showed up. And I'd be certainly willing to bet him because he's going to be a price coming out of races like this. Just an allowance. Heck, he was in a claiming race 3 starts back. So really interesting horse, cool horse, and look forward to following him.
We saw a maiden race on Saturday with some well-meant first-time starters, some horses who had run before, and it earned a pretty decent speed figure. The winner of the race, Ginobili, just really dominated on the front end. He was one of the horses with experience. He hadn't run that well in his debut at Los Alamitos, but he showed vastly improved speed in this spot and turned back multiple challenges to win the race. The horse that, of course, I'm interested in out of this race is the runner-up, Honor AP, who looks like the spitting image of his sire, Honor Code, with all of this chrome all over him. He's probably got even more white on his legs than Honor Code did, but has that same sort of action, ran the same sort of race that Honor Code did in his debut, and was closing well to be second for John Sheriffs, who probably was just giving this horse a race first time out.
Yeah, I agree. I remember the days when John Sheriffs used to be about 45% first off the bench, but that was a long time ago when he trained for a different main owner, Neefy Farms, 505 Farms of Marshall Neefy. But this was a strong 2-year-old race. Ginobili, and in my head, I keep hearing Charles Barkley going, Ginobili! It's after Manu Ginobili, the basketball player. But good effort. He got a 108 for the win. As you say, Honor AP looked really good once he got underway. And even the third place horse, a solid horse, good effort from a Bob Baffert trained Hydrogen, who I'd expect more from next time out. So I really think this is going to be a strong maiden race. I would assume we'll see these in stakes horses. We'd see all of the top 3 in stakes races before the end of the year.
Yeah, Ginobili seems like one that has a little bit of a jump on the others in terms of just readiness and experience at this point in time. But I agree. Some of the first-time starters that finished behind him seem like they might have futures. Hydrogen was sort of the lesser touted of 2 Bob Baffert horses in this race. His stablemate actually got bet down to be the even money favorite, oddly enough, in what looked like a pretty competitive race. But Hydrogen ran well to be third, 6 lengths ahead of the rest of the field. And Honor AP, though, is the one that really interests me because he looks like a horse that wants to run all day based on just the way that he was striding out and the way he started the race. And for him to finish second and earn a 101 TimeformUS speed figure in a 6-furlong debut, this is a horse that I think a lot of people are going to be following out of this race because, and just the fact that Mike Smith was riding him first time out, I think that just points him out as a horse that's pretty interesting because Mike Smith does not get on a whole lot of 2-year-old first-time starters these days.
Yeah, he certainly doesn't. And I think that was a good sign for this one. And I'm sure he was thinking down the line as well with that one. One quick note about Ginobili that I'll mention is we've mentioned how Del Mar can be quirky. Los Al, I think, is the ultimate quirky track. And that's why I generally, when I handicap, just kind of put a line through the Los Al races. Ginobili went off 2-1 first out, didn't really run a step, got a low figure. But, if you ignore that and see he was obviously well meant first time out, 19-1 was a bit crazy in here. I get the field was loaded, but just a little tip for our listeners. Those Los Al races, whenever I see the LRC, I almost just scan over them like they don't exist.
Yeah, the surface in California these days are very different from each other. So you do see some form reversals like that as horses switch from Los Al or from Santa Anita to Del Mar. That's not totally surprising to see that. And second-time starters, they can always improve off a debut run. So even American Pharoah lost his debut and didn't look like the horse that he turned out to be later. One more race from Del Mar to discuss, a Sunday allowance race going 6 furlongs. Flagstaff, I think we had talked about the allowance race he was coming out of on a prior episode of the podcast because American Anthem had won that race, the Bob Baffert trainee, and beaten Flagstaff. But Flagstaff might have actually run the better race in that American Anthem heat. And this time out, he stalked the pace and just proved a little better than these horses he was facing.
He did, and a really good effort. He got I believe it was a 122. For the effort, and he's another John Sadler trainee. Now, John Sadler's had him all along, and he's kind of had to take his time with him. He had a nice long layoff before coming back this year, but he's looked really good, and this was clearly his best effort to date so far this year. He got a 121, I see now. That'll appear in the charts tomorrow. But he beat American Pastime, who's been a solid enough sprinter. Same with California Street, who was well back in third, but just a good effort, and I assume we'll see him in probably the Santa Anita Sprint Championship. That's kind of the Breeders' Cup prep out there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. He's definitely heading in the right direction. He's a lightly raced 5-year-old. I think I mentioned before he's actually a half brother to Game Winner. So even though he's not a routing horse like that, he's definitely got some class in the pedigree. So we'll see where he goes from here. I don't know if he's quite good enough to tackle Graded Stakes Company, but based on this speed figure, he's at least heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I think out in California he probably is. Now overall, maybe not.
True.
But it's been a weak year without Roy H this year.
Yeah, we saw, I forget which one of those races, the Triple Bend or the Bing Crosby. I forget the name of the one they just ran a couple weeks ago, but didn't earn the fastest speed figure, wasn't the best race. That horse Sistron, I think, won it. Yeah, I think that division is kind of there for the taking. So we'll see if a new face like this can step up and do some damage against those horses. We'll move on to Saratoga, where they ran a whole host of stakes races. Just one Grade 1 event, though. That was the Alabama, the feature race on Saturday, the big race of the summer for the 3-year-old fillies. And it looked like it was going to be a beautiful day for this race. It really held the weather until about the 9th race on the card. Then the skies just opened up, and we'll talk about that in relation to the Lake Placid. But this Alabama was run over a very sloppy racetrack. And I actually don't think it had that great of an effect on the finish because the horses that were supposed to do well did well in this race. I don't think they were badly affected by the racetrack condition at all. And Dunbar Road, she handled the 10 furlongs, and she just took that step forward out of the Mother Goose that I think a lot of us thought she could. And she was just a little bit better than her main rival, Point of Honor.
She was, and we talked about both these two last time out extensively, and even Street Band, who had run a very good race last time out. I think it was in Indiana. I thought they all ran well. Dunbar Road was just the better of the three. She was the one that handled 10 furlongs the best, and a very strong race for the division. She got a 119 TimeformUS speed figure, a 117 for Point of Honor, which is about as good as we've seen save Guarana in the one-turn races. So just a strong effort from this one, and I really look forward to seeing what she's going to do, because this is one, when you see this kind of effort, you think, well, maybe she could step up and run with the Olders. Now, obviously, we're going to see late and midnight Bisou this weekend, and that's some pretty formidable foes, but she certainly showed some promise here, and it's not out of the question that she could run with horses like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And she will face older horses next time out because Chad Brown has said that Guarana is pointing to the cotillion, so she's not running there. So I would imagine that they're going to run her in the Beldame next, which I think is a great spot for her. She should love the mile on an 8th distance, and she obviously loves Belmont Park. So I think she's the kind of horse that definitely could step up against older horses because while the personal ensign fillies that we'll see on Saturday at Saratoga, they're running a little bit faster than she is. Dunbar Road's definitely heading in the right direction. And I like this win in the Alabama. And I know people get really down on this class of 3-year-old fillies, but if you take the last few Grade 1, Grade 2 races from this division that we've seen just in isolation and forget how they looked earlier in the year, I mean, the Test was an extremely fast race. The Acorn was an extremely fast race. I know they didn't try to run a faster speed figure in the coaching club with Guarana, but she can obviously run faster speed figures. And this was a very fast race. So we'll see what happens with these horses. But I think it might be a better group than we originally expected them to be. And as you were saying, even a horse like Street Band is really stepping up her game lately. I took a shot with her as a long shot in this race. And I mean, I can't complain at all because Sophie Doyle gave her a perfect ride, saving ground, splitting horses at the top of the stretch. She was just third best to two pretty nice fillies. Point of Honor, she's really not that much worse than Dunbar Road because she got a very wide trip in this race. And I do think it's worth pointing out that the winner, Dunbar Road and Street Band, both did save ground most of the way. And Point of Honor sort of had to go 4 wide around the far turn. That compromised her a little bit. But just my point is, these are 3 really nice horses.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I'm with you on the division. I was down on it, and rightfully so, around Kentucky Oaks time because none of the horses were particularly running very fast. But they've really stepped it up. And sometimes you get that with crops. Sometimes the horses go on and mature and get faster. And sometimes they get a little worn out in that early season, races that they have to go through to get to a race like the Oaks and the Mother Goose. But we're not seeing that here. We're seeing horses that are developing nicely, and I'm really looking forward to seeing these in the fall campaigns.
One race before the Alabama, we saw the Lake Placid contested at Saratoga, or we sort of saw it. I couldn't really make it out, but apparently they ran the race. Just before the race occurred, there was the the skies darkened at Saratoga. Everything went dark. They had to turn on the lights in the press box. It's kind of a scary scene. And as the race was running, lightning was striking, the rain was falling. There was a long photo finish after the race because we couldn't make out who the winner was, and the horses were circling as lightning was striking all around with thunder. I mean, it was quite the amazing scene. I'm sure there was the photographers that are out there getting soaked. I'm sure they got some great shots during this race. But Regal Glory and Varenka hit the wire together. They declared it a dead heat. I think it's okay to say that Regal Glory probably was the winner of this race if you look at the video footage, but I understand how they had to declare this a dead heat because there is no backup to the photo finish system, and the photo finish didn't really show a clear winner. But both of these horses, they ran okay. They overcame a slow pace to get up to share the victory. Not the greatest fillies out there, but just a fascinating race to analyze for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it was. They got a 110, which is a little below the Del Mar race with Cambier Park we talked about earlier. So solid enough, nothing too exciting. I guess, like you said, the real excitement was the weather and the photo. And this is one race I actually did watch live. I didn't see too many races. I tried to make it a real vacation. I've watched them all since I got back, but decent effort. I'm not going to beat up on the stewards. They did what they had to do with given the information that they had and using the technology they had. I do think horse racing really needs to do better. If you're not going to be able to judge the finish, then maybe you should hold off running the race a little bit. I don't know. There's no perfect solution here, but I do agree with you. Regal Glory looked to have won the race, but it was close enough. I can live with what the stewards decided.
Well, I mean, think about the alternative situation. What if they had declared Regal Glory the winner, and then people would have said, well, where's the photo? And then they show that photo finish. I mean, please, they would have rioted. So I get it. I don't disagree with the decision at all. They probably have to install some lights on the inner turf course, and that would basically solve all of the issues. But hopefully we don't have to run two more races in the dark at Saratoga. There's been some crazy weather recently. And I mean, it's good to have those backups when you need them, but hopefully we don't need them too often. The only other stakes race that we ran on Saturday at Saratoga was the Smart and Fancy. Bit of an upset here. Morticia, who was bet down to even money off a pretty terrible trip in the Caress in her prior start. They tried out different tactics with Morticia this time. I think that they were really concerned about not getting in the same situation that cost her the victory last time. And they might have gone overboard with using her too aggressively in the early portion of this race because she's not a front-running type, but they wanted to show speed, and it didn't seem like there was a ton of speed on paper. But they ended up going a pretty honest clip in this race, and the race just fell apart and set it up for Alexandra, who is a good horse in her own right.
Yeah, she is. And I mean, if you could predict that the pace was going to fall apart, she was the horse we had as clearly the best closer in here. But, I'm not saying that was easy to predict. I wouldn't have seen that one coming, but solid enough effort, a 111 for her, a 110 for the runner-up, Miss Gossip, who was a huge price in here and just kind of rated a few lengths off of the speed and was able to outlast the others. Even Ruby Notion in third came from off the pace. So it was a complete meltdown in here. I'll be curious to see how this one comes back and if some horses revert to some different tactics next time.
I think this race just exemplifies how little margin for error there is in these turf sprints. And if something with the pace goes amiss or if a trip goes amiss, you can see a pretty wacky result. And not that Alexandra is a surprising winner of this race, as you were saying. She was the best closer in the field. And while her prior TimeformUS speed figures seem like this was a bit of an upset because she hadn't quite run this fast in the past, she's a horse that I think we had talked about before on the podcast, or that at least I had talked about in my handicapping prior to the race, that she had run very well in some slow-paced situations in prior starts at Belmont, running final quarter miles that are almost unbelievable. I think she ran a 21-2 final quarter in one of her sprints to the finish at Belmont. So she's a really strong finisher, and she's also a horse that just gets along so well with Joel Rosario. He just seems to have a knack for getting the best out of certain horses, and she's one that really responds to his handling because she can get a little rank in the early going. You've got to settle her down at the back of from pack and save that late burst of speed for the stretch. And he just does that so perfectly with her, with any horse that has a style like this. And they're just a really well-matched team.
Yeah, he's a really strong rider. I would say probably about the strongest one out there, and fits this horse like a glove.
The major race on Sunday at Saratoga was the Summer Colony listed stakes race for the older, actually a restricted stakes race for the older fillies and mares going 1 1/8 miles. And I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. Blue Prize, she hadn't won a race so far this year. She had finished 2018 on such a strong note, winning a few stakes races, finishing fourth in the Breeders' Cup Distaff, just a couple lengths behind Monomoy Girl. And while she had lost all of her races so far in 2019, I felt like she had just been facing some better company, horses like Elate and that other horse who I'm forgetting now, who was second in the Delaware Handicap, Escape Clause. They're just a little better than she is, and getting this class relief, it really made the difference for her.
Yeah, it was a decent effort. She ran a 118, which is pretty much what she always runs. I think the real story in here was Vexatious, coming off the turf and running on dirt. And I thought she ran very well. Every bit as good as the winner. She was up part of a really solid pace. Took over and just didn't have enough left to hold off Blue Prize late, but she did dig in really hard. It looked like that one was going to go right by and win by a couple lengths with a furlong to go, but she fought it out all the way to the wire, got the same 118 on our speed figures as Blue Prize did, and I thought that the top two ran well.
No, I agree with that. Vexatious, she's kind of a funny horse because she had been a nice dirt horse as a 3-year-old earlier in her career. She ran a nice race in the Kentucky Oaks behind Abel Tasman a couple of seasons ago. And they just kept her running her on turf, even though she didn't really improve much on the turf. They just kind of stuck her on the turf, I guess, because they could run longer distances, and that's what she wants to do. But I think she proved in this race she's every bit as good on the dirt, and there might be some better opportunities for her on the dirt. So I wouldn't be shocked if they keep her on the dirt from here on out, because she can obviously get these longer two-turn distances. And she ran just as well as Blue Prize. I know Blue Prize has that tendency to wait on horses a little bit, so maybe she was a little more superior to the runner-up than the final margin of victory indicates. But they were 14 lengths ahead of the rest of the field, so they both ran really well.
Yeah, no doubt.
We saw Kamari, a 2-year-old filly, win the Bolton Landing on Wednesday at Saratoga. She was the heavy favorite. She set a pretty slow pace and just dominated. She's the one Wesley Ward filly that had run well going over to Royal Ascot a couple months ago. She was second by a head in the Queen Mary, a Group 2 race, and she just outclassed this field, and it really showed on the racetrack.
Yeah, I put this horse in the rundown just because she was a horse who had run well at Ascot and it's got a little bit of a name. But this race and the male version of the same race, I forget the name of it, were both pretty slow. This one only got a 91 TimeformUS speed figure. Now, granted, she won really easily, so did it well within herself. So maybe she's a horse capable of running faster. But I'm not overly blown away by this one by any means. We'll see where she comes back, and she might be one I'd be willing to take a shot against just based on her reputation, and she just didn't run that fast.
Yeah, I do want to just give a quick mention to the male version of this race, the Skidmore, which was won by Another Miracle, one of the progeny of American Pharoah, who is turning out to be quite a sire. We've seen a few of the American Pharaohs that can really run, some on dirt, a lot of them on turf, and Another Miracle is one who can run on both. I didn't earn a speed figure either. I think that got a 90 when I was looking through the charts. That's a race that they kind of rushed the post time a little bit, and it was run right before some weather came down. So I don't know if maybe those horses didn't have a chance to run quite as fast as they otherwise might have. But I think he's a decent horse too, and he's bred to stretch out. So we'll see if he can do it. But I agree. Both of these races, they didn't earn very fast figures. So it's unclear how good these horses really are. Kamari at least run much faster in her prior starts. I think just based on the pace of this race and the fact she was ridden so conservatively is why she didn't a higher speed figure in this Bolton Landing. One horse that definitely did earn a pretty high speed figure is Uncontested, who won an allowance race on Thursday at Saratoga. One of those Saratoga allowances that probably could have been a listed stakes because there are some horses that were dropping out of the graded stakes company to run here. And it looked like he might be able to get loose. The pace projector indicated that. There was one other speed in the race who just wasn't nearly as fast as Uncontested. And the key for this horse is just getting out to the lead and controlling the pace. And That's what he was able to do here, and he earned a pretty fast clocking, 7 furlongs with 1:20 and 2, nearly tying the track record.
Yeah, he got a 124 time U.S. speed figure for the effort, which he's been a bit disappointing his last few starts since winning the General George. But when he won that race with a similar trip, he ran a real nice 127 TimeformUS speed figure that day. So he certainly has talent. As you said, the key with him, he just has to get out in front. He did make the lead last time out at Churchill, fought it out a little bit, but didn't do as well in his first start for Tom Amoss. But this second time out, man, he looked like the same horse we saw in the General George. Much stronger effort here, and I'm not going to rate him on those bad races when he comes back. This looked like the one I think we're going to be seeing going forward.
Well, he's definitely aptly named because that's the kind of trip that he needs to have success. He needs an uncontested lead. And while he did get the lead in that prior start at Churchill Downs, he was hounded by another horse. And he just doesn't seem to run well in those situations. He needs to sort of have things his own way up front, which he kind of did in the General George. That wasn't the fastest pace in the world, even though it was a large field. And we'll see. He's a horse that definitely is capable of running these mid-120 speed figures when things go right for him. But there often is a lot more speed in these stakes races for the sprinters. So he's not always guaranteed to get the kind of trip that he wants. So he's a horse that I would still be a little wary of moving forward, even though he did run to those stellar workouts that he had coming into this race. And he's a big, beautiful horse. So, I mean, he's got a ton of ability. It's just he doesn't always get things going his way, and he really needs them to.
Yeah, that's a good point. You do see a lot of horses like that. We're going to talk about one a little later and maybe Jaywalk. We'll see if you agree, but we'll get to that one later.
Another allowance race from the past week at Saratoga was on Friday, Up the Ante, won a turf race going a mile and a 16th for Christophe Clement. This is a horse that had run pretty well as a 3-year-old. He was second to Raging Bull in the Saranac last year and hadn't quite gotten things off to a great start in 2019, lost an allowance race, was just no factor in the Monmouth Stakes behind some better horses than he was facing on Friday, and got the right pace set up in this race. He was probably a lucky winner because he was lone speed. He really had no excuse to lose this race based on the way the pace set up. And Multiplier, who was closing late to be second, was really the only horse that was making up a ton of ground at the lane. And it almost looked like Multiplier got his body in front at the wire, but Up the Ante just got that lucky bob to hold on for the victory.
He did. And to be honest, Multiplier's the reason I even put this race on our list today. He got a 118 speed figure from us, where Up the Ante got a 116. And that was due in large part, I mean, almost entirely to the slow pace. I mean, if you look in our charts, you'll see the opening quarter mile figure for Up the Ante was a 53, which is almost unheard of for horses this good. He wound up with a final time of 113. So, I mean, they were really flying late. And it's not like Multiplier was way back. He was only a couple lengths behind. But when you get a horse like Up the Ante, who's basically sprinting as fast as he can possibly run to the wire, they're always going to be proved tough to run down. And the fact that he essentially did it, like you said, it was just a bad head bob that got him beat, is pretty impressive. And, he looks like maybe he's ready for a return to stakes competition.
Yeah, this was a strong allowance race. I mean, the horse that was third, Murad, he had been competitive in some stakes in the past. So I wouldn't be shocked if Multiplier could step back up. I mean, he's not a grade 1 or grade 2 kind of horse, but there are plenty of opportunities for these lower levels stakes horses on the turf where he could step up and do a tougher spot. I saw some people criticizing Joel Rosario for his ride on Up the Ante, almost getting that horse beat. People are saying because he never took out the whip and just hand rode him to the wire. And I think that's just ridiculous. If you watch Up the Ante's prior races, I wouldn't be shocked if he was riding to instructions, because this is a horse that seems to respond best to a really strong hand ride. And some horses just don't respond to the whip. And I feel like jockeys resort to the whip sometimes just as a show. It doesn't actually do that much with horses that are clearly giving their best. And Up the Ante was obviously giving his best for Joel Rosario under a hand ride, so there was no reason to go to the whip. And I think sometimes people just get used to seeing the same thing over and over again and aren't open to the idea that this was actually a great ride.
Yeah, and you're not going to get, as we said, or I said earlier, you're not going to get a stronger ride than you're going to get from a good, strong hand ride from Joel Rosario. I'm a guy who I'd much rather see that than a guy going to the whip. Give it, if you need to show it to them or, give them a reminder of what they're out there for, fine. But when they're heading to the wire, I want that strong ham ride.
All right. One of my favorite horses this summer at Saratoga has been the 2-year-old filly that we saw break her maiden on Sunday at Saratoga, Mrs. Danvers, who won the 6th race. She's just this beautiful, white-looking daughter of Tapit. She's got this amazing pedigree. She's out of a half-sister to Warfront, so she's really bred to be a special horse, and she's certainly handled herself in her first couple of starts like she might be something really good for Shug McGahee. She had the trip that everybody saw on her debut back in July, where she got left at the start, made this early move into contention, went wide on the turn, was a little green, finished 3rd, and she really put things together second time out. I mean, Joel Rosario was like sitting on a keg of dynamite throughout this race, and he coming to the top of the stretch, you almost wondered if he was getting her into trouble intentionally, because she was in behind horses she was really wanting to go, and he was restraining her until about the 3/16 pole when he swung her out. And she finished as you would hope that she would, and she's bred to stretch out. This is one that I think you can rightly get a little bit excited about.
Yeah, she got a 101 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort, and she's one when she steps in the stakes company, I would assume, next time out, and certainly going longer than 6.5. I wouldn't expect a 101. I'd expect a much better figure from her, because I think just watching the race, you can see she wasn't asked to give everything. She wasn't ridden the whole time. She wasn't ridden to get a fast speed figure. She was ridden to win the race, maybe learn something in the process, and she looked really good. Finite, who ran second, is no slouch at all. She's not going to be a maiden very long. She's just run into a couple of monsters first 2 times out, both times runner-up. And even the 3rd finisher, Abilene Trail, was a Todd Fletcher first-time starter who took quite a bit of money at the windows, was almost bet as much as Finite was, I believe. So another disc. This is one of those we talked about at Del Mar. This is going to be a strong maiden race for fillies, and particularly Mrs. Danvers.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I've gone on enough about the winner of this race. I agree with everything you said about the 2nd and 3rd place finishes. I mean, we often see this Steve Aspen second-time starters improve at Saratoga, and I think Finite did take a step forward. She just ran into a filly that might be pretty special. And I agree, Abilene Trail, if you look at her pedigree, she's really bred to run all day. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see all 3 of these in stakes company moving forward. But obviously, Mrs. Danvers is going to move on to, I would assume, a race like the Frizette, because that's where she belongs off a performance like this. We saw a bunch of really nice maiden performances from the 2-year-olds across surfaces this past week. And another one that sticks out is Mystic Lancelot on Thursday. He won one of those 5.5 furlong turf sprints. Todd Fletcher has been doing a little bit better with the 2-year-olds this season than the prior 2 seasons, where he was just really disappointed with the horses that he sent out that got bet. This horse took money and really did run to the support. And he showed a ton of professionalism in this race, because he got to the lead. A Wesley Ward horse sort of zoomed past him going into the far turn. John Velasquez took him back a little bit. He went around that horse and re-rallied and really finished up strongly. This seems like a nice turf horse for Todd Fletcher, kind of in the mold of a Bulletin that we saw last year.
Yeah, that's exactly the comparison I was going to make. Bulletin kind of did it under the radar because he ran at Gulfstream, and obviously not during the championship meet early in the year as a 2-year-old. It was kind of during the summer when not as many people are paying attention to Gulfstream as they do in February and March. But this is a really good effort. He got a 105 speed figure for the effort. Ran, I mean, just one easy as could be. Like you said, looked very mature doing so, very professional. And he's a horse I would expect to be very strong next out wherever he shows up. It's hard to guess with these 2-year-old turf sprinters. I haven't become as familiar with the schedule for them as some other divisions, but I'm sure he'll be in a stakes race next time.
Yeah, just to give a quick mention to the Todd Pletcher horse that was supposedly the fastest horse in the barn that ran on Saturday last week. And, well, maybe he still is, but he didn't show it on Saturday. That was Candy Tycoon, who was just bet off the board to win his debut, and things didn't go well. He broke slowly, and just nothing went right. And that didn't turn out to be a very fast race overall. So we'll see if those horses do better in the future. But the race that was expected to be the fastest just didn't turn out to be, and that sometimes happens with the 2-year-olds. We'll move on to the last 2 venues that we'll discuss, Monmouth and Woodbine. And you had mentioned it a little bit earlier, that Jaywalk ran in the Monmouth Oaks this past weekend, choosing that seemingly easier spot over the Alabama. And didn't turn out to be that easy, because there's a New Jersey bred running at Monmouth that's gotten pretty good.
Yeah, her horologist, she's no slouch. She got a 116 for the win. Jaywalk got a 117 for being part of a pace battle up front with a fairly quick pace, not enough to get the red designation. But, I think at this point, Jaywalk, I'm leaning to the side that she just has to have a clear lead to run her best. Because when she gets left alone up front, she runs fast, she runs big figures. But when she gets any kind of pressure, she just doesn't look like the same filly to me. She runs okay. She ran okay here. I'm not going to say she ran bad. I mean, a 117 is a nice number, but she couldn't beat a horse like Horologist at 1-5. So she looks like a need to lead to me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. She can run those big speed figures when she gets everything her own way. And I agree. When I watched this race, I kind of expected it was a much weaker race than the speed figure ultimately is saying that it is. And the speed figure makes sense. I mean, Horologist had run fast in the past, so it's not like this number, the 116 that she got for winning this race was totally out of left field. Jaywalk regressed by 5 points. It's not huge, but I think what you were saying about her getting a little pressure up front, it really does make a big difference for a horse like her. And she's just not the same filly when she doesn't get that clear lead. This, I think, was a prep for the Cotillion. We'll see how she does there. Guarana is another horse with speed that probably is going to challenge her again on the front end. So it's going to be tough for Jaywalk to win a race like that. But she does have the talent to run those faster speed figures when things go her way. It's tough to back a horse like that in races that do feature other speed.
Right. You just got to, if you think she's going to get challenged, I think at this point you got to be against her.
We'll wrap up the podcast. Well, before we wrap up, we'll discuss the Woodbine races from the past weekend. There were a couple of stakes races on Saturday, the Breeders' Stakes and the Catch a Glimpse for the 2-year-olds. The Breeders, these aren't the best Canadian 3-year-olds that we've seen. Credit to Tone Broke, who has now won the last 2 legs of the Canadian Triple Crown after finishing 3rd in the Queen's Plate. That's always a pretty cool feat because they're run on 3 different surfaces now, and you have got to show a ton of versatility to do well in all 3 legs of that sequence. But Tone Broke, I think he just kind of won this race by default. I think he won this race because some others that were ahead of him coming to the 8th pole just didn't get the distance.
Yeah, I was wondering if we should actually even bring this race up. So we'll just hit it real quick. It was a slow race. The winner got a 104. I just like that he won 2/3 of the Triple Crown, 1 on dirt, 1 on turf. I think the main thing here is these horses are just not 1.5-mile turf horses. I think they're a solid enough group if they get back to, 1.1 1/8 and running on synthetic or on dirt. They won't run on dirt, but running on the synthetic at Woodbine, they'll be fine. They're okay, but this just wasn't their thing. So hats off to Tone Broke guy. Steve Asmussen probably doesn't win many 1.5-mile races on turf, so decent enough, but nothing special here. Just hats off for winning 2 or 3.
Yeah, I have nothing to really add to that. I agree. The Catch a Glimpse, though, I think that's an interesting race to mention because the winner of this race, the 2-year-old filly Fair Maiden, she's got some real talent. I forget if we discussed this race on the prior podcast when she broke her maiden. I think we might have skipped it when she won by 14 lengths at Arlington and earned a pretty impressive 109 TimeformUS speed figure. And she came back and backed that number up, doing so on the turf. I mean, she just decimated this field, really drawing off with impressive strides in the lane. She's one that can probably go a little bit farther than this. She's a nice horse for Owen Hardy.
She is. She's a fast horse. I was surprised to see. I didn't see this race live that she was actually 3-1 in here, as was the runner-up Western Taffy, who was coming off a race with only an 86 speed figure, trained by Mark Cassidy. So I'm sure that had something to do with it. But this is a fast filly, no doubt about it. That 109, she got a 102 here. She won by 7.5 lengths, and I don't think she was all out. So I'm not going to say 102 really reflects what she can do. Probably in that range, but curious to see what she does as they can run longer sprints at Woodbine. They go all the, even a mile and a 16th is around 1 turn. So it'll be interesting to see where she shows up, but no doubt about it, this is a fast 2-year-old filly.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to look at her pedigree because she's by Street Boss and they can all run on the turf and they're typically pretty quick. But there's like a ton of stamina on the dam side. I think her dam actually won going 1.5 miles. It's the family of Secret Status who won the Kentucky Oaks. So we'll see if she can stretch out. She's certainly a quick, precocious horse right now. Sometimes those don't go on, but she's one that I think you can rightly get a little bit excited about. We will now wrap up the podcast by doing a little preview of the Travers Stakes. Before I came on, I was just putting the finishing touches on the morning line for the race because they're drawing the race a little bit later today, and I got to get that in early. I started looking at it yesterday thinking that I was going to make Tacitus a big favorite. But as you actually go through this field, there's a lot of depth to the horses that are left in this race, even without the two Gary and Mary West horses, Maximum Security and Game Winner, who are both defections from the race. There's still some nice horses in here, and I don't think it's any kind of walk in the park for Tacitus.
No, this is a strong group. I mean, as we've been talking about all year, this 3-year-old division, while it doesn't really have any standouts, some people might want to call Maximum Security a standout. We'll see. He's certainly right up there with any of these and probably the leader of the division. But this is a strong group of horses. Mucho Gusto was a late addition to the race, and he's coming off a race in the Haskell where he lost to Maximum Security, but ran a 127 TimeformUS speed figure. Taxes coming out of the Tim Dandy, where both he and Tacitus ran 125. Owendale's coming from, I forget which race, Ohio Derby, I think it was, where he ran a nice 124. We got Code of Honor coming out of his win where he got a 119 with a really slow pace that he overcame. Now, granted, that wasn't a very strong field at all, especially if you look back at the horses out of there. But he did what he had to do. That wasn't the main thing for him, and he won so easily. I'm not going to knock him for who was in the field.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's 12 horses expected. I go through and I count maybe 4 that would be really surprising winners, but I think there were 8 horses in this race that you could actually make a case for. I mean, even the horses coming out of the Curlin, Highest Honors and Doris, who are first and second there. I mean, they've got the pedigrees to be nice horses, and they can certainly improve going 1.25 miles. And you know that I'm interested in looking at bikinis. And I'm glad that Chad Brown's running him in this race because he was on the deadest rail that I've ever seen in the Curlin. And I don't think it's ridiculous to say that he might have won that race with a better trip because he lost by 6 lengths on a day when other horses that rode the rail were losing by 20 or 30 lengths. So, I mean, and also the other thing about this Travers that's interesting, obviously I haven't seen the TimeformUS pace projector yet, but when you go through this field, there's not a ton of speed in this race for a 12-horse group. A lot of these horses are coming, they do their best running from off the pace. Even the horses with tactical speed like Tax and Mucho Gusto, they're not the fastest horses in the world. So it looks like looking at bikinis might just be pretty loose on the front end. And I think that makes him pretty dangerous in a 12-horse lineup.
I agree with you there. I was already have a little bet with myself that he was going to be your pick when you do the race preview. And not for a second knocking it, because I may very well be backing him at the windows myself at what should be a decent price. I'm curious to see what your morning line will be. I'll wait it out. I won't put you on the spot here. One question I will ask you about is you said you've made it. Or will you make any adjustments for post position once it's drawn in a big field? I know they would be small, but any chance, somebody you like draws far outside that it would cause a change?
Well, this is one of the situations where I don't have the opportunity to do that because they're doing the post position draw tonight, the live draw. So I have to submit it ahead of the draw so that Larry Comas can announce it as they're drawing the race in real time. So I can't make those adjustments, but I will say I don't make adjustments for post position really ever in races that are going this far. To me, it's not something that you can really account for. And I don't think people really make those kind of adjustments in races like the Travers. I mean, what's a bad post position in a race like the Travers? I can't even say. So, I'm not going to it's not something I'd really consider, even though I don't have the opportunity to do it. Obviously, the break will be important for some horses in the race, most notably Tacitus, who completely blew the break of the Jim Dandy and has had some bad trips in the past. They're adding blinkers for this race. I don't totally agree with the people that say that Tacitus is a horse that makes his own trouble, but he is a horse that comes from off the pace, and those horses do always need a little bit of racing luck, and he's definitely going to need it in a 12-horse field. So we'll see. I don't think post position is going to get him beat, but he just has to get the right trip.
Right. And my eyes will be on him because he's always an interesting watch no matter what. I imagine he's going to get bet pretty heavily, honestly, I would think. I agree with you. It's a deep field. He's not going to be 4-5 or anything like that. But this is a fascinating race to me. And I'm really hoping somebody, I'm not sure which of these it would be, but I think there's a lot of talent. I hope somebody really steps up and puts a stamp on this and says, hey, I'm the leader here. I know it might be a little tough to do without maximum security in here. I assume he's probably going to show up in Pennsylvania. But between these two races, between the Pennsylvania Derby and this one, I think we're going to get a lot of sorting out of this division.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just to refresh my memory, I was going back and looking at last year's Travers Field. And I mean, if you remember last year, the horses were kind of struggling to run 120s on the Timeform US speed figure scale ahead of the Travers. And this group, a bunch of them have already gone and surpassed 120. So I think this could be the kind of race that earns a higher speed figure, and a horse sort of, or multiple horses start to distinguish themselves as runners that can go on to the fall and continue to do better things, because there is a lot of depth to this crop, and there are many that have the opportunity to step forward in this Travers. So it's a race that I'm really looking forward to. I'm looking forward to just getting the final PPs and handicapping it, forgetting about the whole morning line question, just deciding who I want to pick, although I do have a pretty good idea of that already. It's a fascinating race from that perspective, and I'll be fascinated to see how things go in this final week with the preparations and the final workouts that have just been completed. I'll look at all those, and it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, I'll close. I'm going to make my not so bold prediction. First one I think I've made on here, that a 3-year-old's going to win the Classic this year. I don't know who it's going to be at this point, but I know this crop's taken a lot of flack from a lot of people, and I just don't buy it. I think it's strong, and I think one of these horses is going to step up and be the best horse.
That's a pretty bold prediction, but I can't really argue with it too much. I mean, the older horses, I mean, we've got McKinsey out there. We'll see if he handles the 1.25 miles, but the rest, I don't know. Is there anybody to be afraid of? I know that people get down on this 3-year-old crop, but I like that prediction. I'm not going to make the same one, but I like that prediction. I like the boldness of it. All right, let's end the show on that note. As always, you can listen to us on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, SoundCloud. As always, just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form podcast, and we're the TimeformUS Pacecast. Thanks for listening this week, guys. And we'll be back next week with a recap of the Travers and all of the other great stakes action from around the country. Thanks for listening. See you next week.